Hello, today we're going to talk about Druids. We don't know much about Druids, but we do have some information left to us by third parties who wrote about encounters with them. And one of those encounters was a battle where Druids used magic against their foe. So welcome to Druids and the Art of War, and welcome to Crecganford. So back in AD 60, Suetonius Paulinus was the governor of the Romans in Britain. And things weren't going particularly great. I mean, the Romans had just managed to invade Britain properly and were just trying to take control. But obviously there were people rebelling. And one of the groups rebelling were the religious groups, the Druids. And the Druids had a particular bolt hole, a particular place where they all went, considered the safe place. And that was a place called Anglesey, which is in northwest Wales. I'll show it on a map. And the Romans called Anglesey Mona Insula. And what the Romans thought was a good idea, and Paulinus thought was a good idea, was they should go to Mona Insula and wipe out the Druids. One of the things we do know about Druids comes from Tacitus. Tacitus was a Roman who documented the Roman conquest of Europe and Britain. And he wrote in a way called Interpretio Romano, which is a way of comparing things to as they were in the Roman way of life. So where there was a god, if in a pagan god in Britain, if it looked or acted or was like a god from the Roman Empire, he would talk about that Roman god rather than the pagan god. And that's quite important, because Romans treated gods from other tribes and areas in exactly the same way as they treated their gods. They thought they had the same power, the same authority, and hence why they were quite willing to bring them into their pantheons. But more about that later, but that's an important point, because when Romans came across pagan gods, they had to treat them with respect. So one of the things Tacitus wrote about was a battle with Druids. And I'll read that now. It's only about a minute long, and then after that we'll actually pull that apart and tell the story how it actually probably happened, because it involves magic and Druids and rituals and an awesomely scary sight. So this is what Tacitus said.
On the shore stood the opposing army with its dense array of armed warriors, while between the ranks dashed women in black attire like the Furies, with hair dishevelled, waving brands. All around, the Druids, lifting up their hands to heaven and pouring forth dreadful imprecations, scared our soldiers by the unfamiliar sight, so that, as if their limbs were paralysed, they stood motionless and exposed to wounds. Then, urged by their general's appeals and mutual encouragements not to quail before a troop of frenzied women, they bore the standards onwards, smote down all resistance, and wrapped the foe in the flames of his own brands. A force was next set over the conquered, and their groves, devoted to inhuman superstitions, were destroyed. They deemed it indeed a duty to cover their altars with the blood of captives, and to consult their deities through human entrails.
So Tacitus's account clearly states that the Roman army pretty much cut down the Druids. And so the battle that happened would have involved a lot of magic from the Druid point of view, because this was the Druid stronghold. And so when the Romans came off their boats and waded to shore, they would have just seen hundreds of Druids, all praying, all reaching for the sky. And they would have had no idea what was going on. And it would have been quite a scary sight for a Roman army who probably rarely encountered such a force. They're used to encountering soldiers armed, but these would have just been Druids praying. And between them they had these Furies, as they called them, dressed in black, holding flaming torches, running in between them, screaming, looking wild. It would have been a real sight to behold, and something that obviously awestruck the Romans, and they needed an incentive of Paulinus and their generals to keep pushing them forward. But then they just hacked down like these Furies holding the flames, because they weren't armed. They just slaughtered them and then went up onto the beach and slaughtered the Druids who weren't armed. It would have been an easy victory. But then they would have realised something, and this is hinted in the text, talking about how the Druids burned in the flames of their own making. Well, that may well mean that the Druids had actually built a pyre, a funeral pyre on the beach, and were standing on it. They were expecting to die. Those prayers they were saying were probably prayers of human sacrifice, a ritual of human sacrifice to help defeat the Romans. And those Furies probably lit that pyre when the Druids were defeated, and some of them that were left over, and they would have burned. And the Roman soldiers would have realised at that point they had taken part in a Druid human sacrifice. They were part of that sacrifice, part of that Druid religion, in effect, for that moment. And that probably would have scared them a hell of a lot. So after those Druids were defeated, they went on and destroyed the groves on the Isle of Anglesea, and they went back again later, sometime later, and actually defeated them again, although they actually swam across the sea rather than came by boat, so surprising them, and destroyed the last of the Druids. So after the battle, the Romans would have been quite scared. I think a lot of the soldiers would have had worries in their head, about witchcraft and magic and spells and what had they done. They had sacrificed humans in a ritual, and that probably played on their mind for a bit. Rumours would have probably circulated about Rome collapsing, or soldiers dying for no reasons, or people becoming ill, or plagues. And then what actually happened was that a woman by the name of Boudicca then started an uprising the other side of England. And so from Tacitus's words we can see a magical battle occurred from the Druids onto the Romans, a battle that the Druids probably thought they had won by being sacrificed and then burnt. Unfortunately, their magic wasn't strong enough to defeat the Romans, and the Romans stayed in Britain for several hundred years. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that story. It's a little subjective, but looking through the words, I could believe something like that actually happened. Anyway, stay safe, stay well, and this was Crecganford. Take care.